So thank you to you, Gary, for inviting me. Okay, for inviting me to this session, and thank you for you to being here. So I will try to, basically what I will do is to provoke, to put some provocative ideas on the table. I'm not a person from academia. I was in a previous life, but I'm not longer. I'm basically an entrepreneur, but also a concerned individual. And talking about anticipation, I'm trying, this presentation tries to think about, to figure out why we as humans, we are able to anticipate, but it seems that we are much abler to ignore what we anticipate and to ignore the knowledge. So this morning we have talked a lot about unknowns, but actually we are much better than that at ignoring what we know and at unlearn previous knowledge we have acquired. And that's pretty strange and surprising, and I'm launching some hypotheses about that. So, talking about anticipation is not exactly a new discipline. I want to refer to a piece of anticipation which was pretty good, in the sense that it was right, which was the study, the Limits to Growth study published by the Club of Rome in 1972. And that's my view, because I'm a member of the Club of Rome, so I am not biased, but I think they were definitely right, and not only me. Last year, a study by the Melbourne University showed that, oh my God, the predictions, the vision by the Club of Rome was pretty much right. And this was published by The Guardian, and saying, so we are nearing collapse. I will come back later to this idea of collapse. But basically, the message here is that the Club of Rome was right. I'm not saying they are the only ones, because actually, if you look at people who anticipated issues related to the environmental, and to the model of economic development we have, it goes back much before the Club of Rome, much before the 60s or 70s. It goes back at least to a guy who has been discarded as a pessimistic guy and who was basically wrong, whose name was Malthus, end of 18th century. So of course we say, well, Malthus was wrong, okay. But the reason why he was wrong is that because agriculture has been developed using a number of chemical elements and productivity tools, who are now causing an unsustainable life cycle for many of those elements. So what has made agriculture a success and made Malthus wrong is a problem now, because the cycles of nitrogen and phosphorus are unsustainable. So was he wrong or was he right? And so you have here a number of people, philosophers, economists, inventors. That's striking. The first solar machines were invented 150 years ago. 1 century and a half ago, the first solar machines. So it's not something of 10 years ago. You know, you have many other examples. You had at the beginning of the 20th century tramways in the US cities. Can you imagine? There were tramways, and that was working pretty well until they were displaced by the oil industry. So they did a pretty good job of lobbying against the tramway companies, and the tramways disappeared. And we had this image of the US as the country of cars. They were tramways. So, and many more, many more. First solar house with a high percentage of self-sufficiency, that was almost 70 years ago. Oh my God, you know. Jimmy Carter was, do you imagine a politician today making a speech against consumerism, against consumption? You cannot imagine that. Jimmy Carter did. Well, he was not re-elected, that's true. But that's, I mean, I think it's an honor that he did that. And I finished this list, which could be much longer. So there are many other people during so long time, you know. So we basically ignored what they said. I finished the list with the only woman, and it is not by chance, I will come back to that later, by the only woman Nobel Prize in Economics, Elinor Ostrom, who showed that against the idea, the topical idea of the tragedy of the commons, there were many communities in the world which since ancient times, or very old times, centuries ago, were able to self-organize themselves to protect the resources, scarce resources. So that's inspiring, but again, that was a long time ago, 25 years ago. So the point is that we basically choose, and what I'm trying to figure out is how we choose the knowledge we use, because we have a lot of knowledge, but we use only part of that, you know. And I think that the real anticipators, the best anticipators we have are artists, and especially poets. Because, and I put in my presentations, I put many times citations by poets. For instance, this one which I like a lot, T.S. Eliot, you know, and that was written in the 30s. Okay, maybe the 30s were a good period to say something like that, but still, you have to be a poet to put it in such words. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? So, yes, so where's the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? The question is still there. So my point of view is that we are gridlocked, actually. So, okay, we have to anticipate, yes, but maybe first we have to try to figure out why we are so much gridlocked. And gridlocked in many dimensions, and that's a paradox, because actually we are gridlocked at high speed. We cannot say that we are not moving. The society is moving all the time. So we're approaching Christmas, so we will have new mobile phones, etc., etc. So yes, it seems that we are moving all the time. But actually we are gridlocked in other dimensions which are more important. And I mentioned these dimensions, of course, that of metabolism, which is a basic one. So we are depredating the resources, non-renewable resources, which is a pretty good recipe for suicide. Don't get it wrong, we are not killing the planet. We are committing suicide. The Easter Island is still there, and there is still life in the Easter Island, but not human life. You know? So we are committing suicide, which is different from killing the planet. Of course, we have a gridlock in proposals because we have got used to something I call financial fantasies, because we are seated, and we'll come back to this later. We are seated on trillions of financial assets, which are basically fictitious, but claiming for real interests, and having real power on how the world evolves. Of course, gridlocking culture, so consumerism, where does it go? So it has a lot to do with the presentation by Alberto. So consumerism is not a way to get self-fulfilled as humans. A gridlock of will, I will not talk about that, but we have a real problem of governance at every level, but especially at the global level. A gridlock of thinking, because who can think when you are all the time looking at Twitter messages? Can you think? Politicians are looking at Twitter message. Basically, in many cases, they behave every day, taking into account what has been a trending topic in Twitter the day before. Can they think? No. And of course, the vision about unlimited growth. So I started to try to set up some kind of framework which could be useful to talk about this, because in the end, my hypothesis, of course, is that we have a wrong framework of interpretation, that everything we do, this is why we select some knowledge and we discard other knowledge, because we have a framework of interpretation which determines that we do that. And I use this saying that besides, of course, the environment, there are some other elements, the social forms, I call that, all the human organizations, so of course companies, institutions, whatever. But there are two issues which are, I think, important, the difference between us and them. We all have this distinction still today, and this is one of the distinctions we have to eliminate. Us and them, that may be us, my family, and the rest of the world, that may be the Western world and the rest of the world, that may be whatever. But if you look at it, there are us and them almost in every thinking we do. And them maybe, for instance, now in geopolitics, maybe the Islamic world, maybe Russia. That's them. The distinction between us and them is important in its consequences because we take for granted that we have a moral superiority compared to them. So we know better than them, you know, what is good for us and for them also. And the other point, which is crucial, is our relationship with time. Absolutely crucial and completely invisible. That's part of our culture, but absolutely invisible. Time, long-term thinking, short-term thinking. We are only thinking about today, tomorrow, and what happens? Why don't we make more explicit our relationship with time? So you can map on this framework the different gridlocks I mentioned. So and see that the framework is absolutely filled with gridlocks. And just to put an example of a framework of interpretation, which in my view has some things good, some things right, but many things wrong. But that's absolutely mainstream now, which is the definition of sustainable development. And everybody adheres to sustainable development. Who doesn't want sustainable development? Very few people. So this is political correctness right now. But look at some of the points, you know, which is important and right, is that takes into account the needs of the present and the needs of the future. Good. But it talks about the world's poor. My interpretation is that the world's poor, in the vision which created the idea of sustainable development, the world's poor are them. That's us. The world's poor are the rest. Because the people who sign the treaties or the documents behind the idea of sustainable development are definitely not the world's poor. And another, and that's even more important. The last sentence, the limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet present and future needs. This is striking. We are saying the environment's ability to meet present and future needs. This means that the environment is there to serve us. We have the superiority to use the environment for our needs. You see? So, a crucial point is to change, of course, our framework of interpretation and change the frames in which we look at things. For instance, on the issue of oil and the controversial issue of the peak oil, so there are still people in denial of the concept of peak oil, that we are finishing with the oil. Does it matter if it lasts for 20 more years or 1 century or 2 centuries? Are we saying that we discard the existence, that we don't pay attention to what will happen to humanity in 2 centuries from now? What happened with the oil is that we basically consumed all of it in a very short period of time compared to the history of mankind. Not to say about the history of the earth. And coming back to financial fantasies, reframing the issues. This picture by the McKinsey Institute is quite impressive. So we have got used to this. I mean, we see this and well, okay, yes, the world, there are much more financial assets in the world. Oh, that seems to be a good thing. But what the hell is that? How can the GDP, that means the production of wealth, grows at a certain pace while the financial assets are growing 3 times faster? Does it make any sense? No. No. It only means that there is a lot, we don't know exactly which part it is, but there is a lot of fictitious capital in those financial assets because, of course, what happened at the same time is that the debts, so those financial assets are mainly financial debt. So it was nice to hear this morning that we don't have to colonize the future. Sorry, the future is already colonized. We have to decolonize the future. The future is already colonized by the financial debt because this is exactly burning out our future, which is the time, by the way, is the least renewable resource we have. No way to renew it. The arrow of time has no restrictions. So the future is already colonized by finance. So we have to change our framework from, for instance, this one, which is a typical representation of sustainable development, and which makes me mad because we are saying in this apparently neutral figure, which takes into account the different dimensions, well, there is a lot in this. There is a lot said in this. First, and most important, what this figure says is that economy, society, and environment are different things. And they are not. There is no way to separate economy, society, and environment. How can you make a company work without people and without interacting with the environment? Unless you do just virtual financial things, you know. But even for that, well, most of that is done by robots, by the way. But so it doesn't make sense to separate the 3 things. And by the way, of course, if you didn't notice it, of course, economy is at the head. So we take care about the society and environment, provided that the economy is working, which is pretty much what we have been saying all these years of the crisis. And that creates, these perspectives creates gridlocks. I think we have, those gridlocks have crystallized in the conflict between these 3 imperatives. I call rentier imperative the idea that money, by the only fact that it exists, should have a profitability, that money has the right to reproduce itself because it exists. Who the hell can accept this as a natural law? It doesn't make any sense. It's completely contrarian to the laws of physics. So, and this rentier imperative is already destroying the democratic imperative in many of the democracies of the world. And I can put, of course, many examples. And up to now, we have been able to manage this by not taking into account the ecological imperative, but it's coming back. No, so don't worry. And yes, we could imagine more balanced visions. For instance, this one of sustainability by Andy Stirling, where there are still 3 dimensions, and sustainability is still the intersection between these 3 dimensions. But look, the names are different, and the names do matter. These names are purposes. So we will have to bifurcate, so I don't have time to get more into the detail of bifurcation. But definitely the gridlocks will be not solved in the same plane. Sentence is attributed to Einstein about something like a problem cannot be solved in the same level of consciousness where it was created. And I very much agree. I don't know if it is a real information, but se non è vero ben trovato. And so we will have to bifurcate, and I must say, I'm sorry to say that, but probably we are already in the collapse, and the only The only thing which prevents us to feel it is that the people who are living the collapse don't have their voices heard. And those who are here, we are still away from the collapse. Again, poetry, which words do we have to sow? And my guess, and I'm really finishing, my guess is this. Well, I'm not stating a closed theory. By the way, much of these words have a lot to do with what you explained, Alberto. Generosity as the principle of progress instead of selfishness, instead of the pursuit of selfish interests. The redefinition of purposes, the role of woman, which is absolutely, I mean, the only reason why I am optimistic is that I think the role of women will continue growing, and that will change the values. That will make the cultural revolution we need, hopefully. How to do that? We don't know. We don't have a plan, and in that I agree with Real Miller. We should not make a plan with stages and phases and etc. etc. We have to follow the advice of a poet from my country who said this, and yes, we have to make the way by walking, and hopefully to finish with an optimistic, just an optimistic image, to use also citation by another writer and poet, woman from India, Arundhati Roy. So hopefully, please notice that she is using the feminine for word. This is not a mistake. This is the citation. I hope she's right. So thank you.